welcome back, Faithful Politics listeners and watchers. If you're watching us on our YouTube channel, I am your political host, Will Wright, and I am joined by your faithful host, Pastor Josh Bertram. What's going on, Josh?
Doing well, Will. Thank you. How are you?
Oh man, living the dream.
Living the dream?
Living the
Yes,
dream.
of course
And,
you are.
Well, this week we have the world's first most important William. His name is William Nee. He has been on the show before. He is the research and advocacy coordinator for the network of Chinese human rights defenders. Previously worked at Amnesty International, and he is my go-to source for all news related to China. And this week, he's actually going to talk to us about something I bet you probably haven't heard much about, and that is China's interest in the conflict going on in the Middle East. So welcome back, Mr. Nee.
Yes, welcome.
Well, thanks for having me, Will, and good to see you, Will and Josh. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just curious, like, because I've always called you William, which actually helps just because like I go by Will, but like, do you go by Will also?
I went by Bill or Billy as a little kid. So yeah, feel free to call me that too. My mom still calls me Billy. So
okay, got it. And the other question I meant to ask you the last time you were on is like, I'm assuming you speak Mandarin or what's the other dialect?
Cantonese.
Yeah. So I speak Mandarin. I lived in mainland China for 6 years, and I actually studied international relations at Fudan University and then Hong Kong University. I have got a master's there, international and public affairs. And then I worked at a Chinese organization called China Labor Bulletin for 5 years, where our common language as an office was Mandarin. I did a lot of translation, but Cantonese, I'm kind of conversational, but not great.
Got it. How would you say Faithful Politics podcast in Mandarin?
Faithful Politics podcast. That's a good question. I don't even know. Podcast would be like 播客, faithful, like 有信的 maybe. So I'm not sure. We'd have to get a new translation for that. 有信仰的播客.
We have defied translation. Well,
yes.
We have defied translation.
We'll have to rely on ChatGPT for that.
Yeah. We'll do. Which we are big fans of the show here of ChatGPT and our AI overlords. But speaking of our AI overlords, I want to talk about China. China seems to have some vested interest in the Middle East conflict, and I'm not 100% sure why. And probably more importantly, they seem to have a vested interest with or for Palestinians and Iran, which is it's sort of weird because especially with a lot of their human rights violations dealing with the Uyghurs, I can't seem to really put the two and two together. So maybe you can kind of give us the background, maybe the history and why should we care about this kind of stuff?
No, I mean, thanks a lot, Will. I think that is very, very important. And I think this dichotomy of why China is so supporting Palestine, but on the other hand, is engaging in some of the worst human rights violations against a Muslim majority population, the Uyghurs, is just one of the greatest paradoxes that people are really struggling to come to grips with. And I kind of want to return to that. But first, I mean, at the outset, let me just say I'm not a Middle East expert. So I don't necessarily know all the details of, the Palestinian issue or Israel. So I want to get that caveat out there. And also just to say that, we're at a time where I looked at CARE, the council, the organization that looks at Muslim rights, and there have been like hundreds of incidents of Islamophobic attacks against Muslims in the U.S. And at the same time, we've seen all sorts of anti-Semitic incidents. So I just want to say, like, I really hope for the best for both communities and Chinese people as well. So just kind of get that out of the way. But I think if you're going to come up with some takeaways, the top line takeaways are in this current conflict, um, China has basically almost totally aligned itself with Palestine and the Arab states, while at the same time trying to position itself as a neutral third party and trying to position itself as a peacemaker. And it says that it stands on the side of peace and of humanity. So it's saying it in very grandiose terms. But and another very important takeaway is that the Chinese media has blamed the U.S. For the hostilities, and Chinese media have basically not shown any of the footage of the attacks, Hamas's attacks against civilians. So, people don't necessarily want to see that gruesome footage, but
Mm-hmm.
I think if you see that footage, you can at least, and the attacks on civilians, you can appreciate, maybe not agree with, but appreciate where Israeli public sentiment and the government is coming from in terms of what it needs to do against Hamas. Chinese or Israeli commentators who focus on China are very frustrated that China has not directly condemned the Hamas attacks. I mean, they've said we condemn all attacks against innocent civilians, but they haven't specifically talked about Hamas. They haven't used the word terrorism. So that's, I guess, one source of frustration for Israeli officials. And then one other really, like I said, one of the other really big points is that they're positioning themselves as a defender of Palestine and of Arab states, while at the same time, like I said, they're carrying out crimes against humanity. I mean, the UN, OHCHR, the Office for Human Rights at the UN, did a great assessment last year that concluded that the mass deprivation of liberty of well over 1 million Muslims, well, not all Muslims. I mean, some people are of other faiths or atheists or even Christians, but in the region may constitute crimes against humanity. And we can talk about that further in depth. But so this is kind of one of the big paradoxes. I think one thing to know is that China's foreign policy, from the 1980s onward, 80s, 90s, and the early 2000s, was known as hiding its talent and biding its time. So China at that point did not want to. This was like the slogan by the former leader Deng Xiaoping. Coming out of the Mao era, they needed what? They needed development. They needed foreign investment. China had angered many of its neighbors over time, and they wanted to have a lower profile, create peace in its periphery, and get involved in international institutions. China was very isolated from the Mao era. They then, rejoined the UN. They joined almost all of the world's multilateral institutions and have become big contributors to them. So during this period, on the international level, China generally wanted to not cause waves, not be an instigator of events, kind of keep a low profile. So in things like the first Gulf War, China kind of stayed out of it. Even in 2003 with the second Iraq War, China basically said we're not going to object to this at the UN level, and just kind of took that position. But starting from roughly, people debate whether it's 2008 or certainly with the rise of Xi Jinping, the current president, although people say his real title is the general secretary of the Chinese Communist Party. That's where he derives his real power. He's nominally the president, and he's also the chairman of the Central Military Commission. So he's similar to the president, commander in chief. But they also say that the party controls the guns in China. So the Communist Party controls the government and it controls the military. But Xi Jinping has said he wants to come back to the world stage, to the center of the world stage. So in other words, China thinks we were kind of at the center of the world for centuries or millennium, and now is our time to kind of become greater players in the world stage. So they've developed things like the Belt and Road Initiative, which is at this point, I think they have over 120 countries on board to invest globally in infrastructure projects and communications. They have now, Xi Jinping has a Global Development Initiative, GDI, Global Security Initiative, which is to provide framework to provide security for the whole world, and a Global Civilizations Initiative, which is where, supposedly different civilizations will talk to each other. And so they now have this very ambitious agenda to try to find a new framework for the world and world peace that they say is not zero sum, it's not colonial, and they're trying to position themselves as leaders of the global South and leaders of the developing world against the West. And I mean, just more broadly, yeah, sure, Josh.
Oh yeah, I mean, this is absolutely fascinating. And whenever it comes to China, it feels like China is like it's like it's so different. The culture and everything is so different from the West, and yet we're so tied to China. We're so like we can't escape our connection with China. Like our connection with like we have to deal with China, right? You can't not deal with China as a major superpower. It's impossible because they're just so massive and they have such great ambition. And I don't know personally how to feel about that. I mean, I understand that you would have ambition, and you would want, if you were a Chinese national, you would want, depending on where you fall, like your country to have ambition and to be on the world stage, just like Americans like that. I think majority of Americans would probably appreciate that, or they would not like it if that status was taken away. All right. But a lot of this has to do with media portrayals. And you have the Chinese media, right, that is controlled by the government. And they're talking about this portrayal of Israel, Palestine, and that they're supposed to be arbiters of peace. How does their coverage, this media coverage in China compare, say, to here, and even to other domestic issues in China? Like, how are they addressing this and putting themselves before the Chinese people as arbiters of truth and justice and all that? How is that working there?
That's a great question. If I could take a step back, I mean, they have, like you said, the media is controlled by the party. So they have a slogan: "The politicians control the press." And Xi Jinping says the goal. He physically went to Xinhua, which is their like AP, their wire service, CCTV or CGTN as it's known, their kind of TV service. And he said, your job is to tell the China story well and to serve the party. So, I mean, and they subscribe to the Marxist view of journalism, which is basically that the news outlets are there to shape public opinion in a way that's helpful to the Communist Party. So, from that point of view, like if you look at their nightly newscast, Xinwen Lianbo, which is like a half an hour long, the typical format is they have the first 20 to 25 minutes are all the meetings and events that the party leaders are going to. They're setting up this economic zone, they're doing this, they're meeting this foreign leader, and all of these constructive things. They're leading, in some agricultural program. And then the last 5 minutes is usually chaos about the foreign world. There's this war going on in Israel and Palestine or wherever it may be. So you come away watching that and you think, oh, we have this, stability and this well-meaning, benevolent government here, and everything else outside of China is chaotic. So yeah, I mean, I think the from what I've been able to understand, the domestic depictions of this conflict have been shaped by atrocities taking place in Gaza. And that is kind of the main visual coverage that you'll see. And there's on the ground reporters for Chinese networks doing that, but you don't really see what's happening in Israel. Meanwhile, like a friend
sense.
of mine, Atio Yang of Freedom House, she wrote a good article last week looking at what's happening online. And there's a tremendous amount of anti-Semitic comments that are being allowed, and also Islamophobic comments. But why is that significant? I mean, you could go on Twitter or X at any moment and find lots of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. So, but the thing is, China has one of the most controlled social media outlets in the world. I mean,
and they're allowing it.
And they're allowing it. So, I think that that's one thing that people have brought up. But another key point, though, is that China did actually broker a détente of sorts between Iran and Saudi Arabia earlier this year. So that came as kind of a shock to many people. Many people were like, "Whoa, China is now like brokering peace," so some of the main takeaways from that.
Yeah, that's kind of weird.
Yeah, but they said that Wang Yi, the foreign minister, said that this would help Middle Eastern countries explore a development path that suits their own national conditions. And this is a euphemism that the government uses when they get criticized for human rights. They say, we want to have a development path that suits our own national conditions, meaning that, they don't have to follow international human rights law and things like that. But at the same time, according to Al Jazeera, they said that in both Iran and Saudi Arabia were willing to let China play this broker role because Iran was facing greater economic isolation, and Saudi Arabia also has difficult, maybe strained ties, arguably, with DC. So that's one aspect. Another really big.
Go ahead.
We look at, the Wall Street Journal reported yesterday that Hamas they trained their attacks in Iran, right? If you look at the media, if you look at like The Intercept and so on, U.S. bases are being hit in Syria. They're being hit in Iraq. Hezbollah is attacking. These are proxies of Iran. Hamas is a proxy. This, to sound cynical, this chaos for the U.S. With warships intercepting drones coming from Yemen, going to Israel, apparently, all of this is a distraction that, along with the Ukraine war, so Russia, of course, is kind of supporting Hamas, as far as I understand it. Meanwhile, right now, China is engaged in very tense blockades in the Philippines, where the Philippines is trying to restock an island that China claims it owns. And the US, the Biden administration, has said, we will support the Philippines. So from the Chinese point of view, they see that they're very much supporting Russia in the Ukraine war, although they also claim to be neutral. They haven't yet met, Xi has not met with Zelensky. They're buying tremendous amounts of Russian oil. Xi Jinping told Putin, we're leading the changes unseen in a century, and they have a cooperation without limits. So it's like, okay, there's that. They are to some extent supporting Iran, and a case could be made that the idea is to bog down the U.S. to give them more leeway in other areas closer to China. So that's one factor that may be going into it.
So do you feel like it's effective? Is it so, like, meaning for a regular, normal Chinese citizen, are they watching this and believing the Chinese government, or are they skeptical of the Chinese government? And are they like, well, of course they're going to say this. They always paint everything in a good light and then show everyone else to have chaos. How effective is it on the ground level, do you think?
Well, that's a great question. It's very difficult to gauge public opinion in China, first of all. There's no independent public opinion polling
Do they even
allowed.
ask the public for its opinion?
I
Don't
do
they
think
tell the public what their opinion is?
I think the party is very concerned about public opinion, and I think they probably do have their own polling, but they don't allow independent polling. So, at any given point, you can go on the internet and find comments that will be supportive of the U.S. or supportive of Israel. But the question is, what is public opinion? I mean, my guess, and that's a caveat to say I'm guessing, is that people generally support the Chinese government's positions internationally. And I think, actually, in my experience at least, many Chinese people pay more attention to international politics than Americans, because they have a paper called the Global Times, which is a kind of a tabloid, similar to like the Sun in the UK or the New York Post or National Enquirer, arguably. But it's run by the People's Daily, the mouthpiece of the government, and it's entertaining. I mean, they have like all sorts of foreign affairs issues, and they write it in a very entertaining style. The U.S. is always the bad guy. Japan is always the bad guy. But a lot of their stories about countries that aren't that important to China are actually fairly accurate and straightforward. But I think because there's not a whole lot to talk about in terms of domestic politics, a lot of people that you meet pay attention to global affairs maybe more than your typical American. But yeah, I think people generally are supportive of the Chinese government. China has called for a ceasefire. They've called for humanitarian corridors. They've called for negotiations. And I think to most people, many people might say, well, all of those things are pretty reasonable. So I think to the public, China may seem like the more reasonable party. Now, obviously, if you're from Israel, you're saying, well, what kind of ceasefire can I have with terrorists who want to commit genocide against me? So there's that kind of counter argument, I guess. But yeah.
Yeah. So I'm curious, William, like give us a sense of how the Chinese media kind of operates. And this is sort of just like maybe just a tangent kind of question, because, for somebody that hasn't been in, or, been a part of sort of like the actual Chinese proper culture, like we could easily, think that like all the media there is run by, like Logan Roy or Rupert Murdoch or, whatever sort of big, conglomerate media organization. Like that's like all they had was Fox News, like, and no other access to anything else. So like, is it ran kind of in the same way that, like say Russia Today has a lot of propaganda, but also they've got some stories that don't have any issues. So like one could read a Russia Today article and be like, okay, yeah, there's really no propaganda here. That makes sense. So, it increases the amount of time that you may want to come back to see what they have to say about X, Y, or Z. So so how does China, manage or regulate like the flow of information?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, in a nutshell, party, like most newspapers, in like the 90s and 2000s, imagine a newspaper less as like a newspaper that we would think of it, and more of like every government ministry is maybe putting out its press releases about what it's done positively. So it's kind of like the FDA would have a press release of we're doing this great stuff, and the Department of Labor, and they're imagine like if you could combine all of those into one newspaper. That might be more a way to think about it. But starting from the 90s, they did have a commercial. The newspapers became commercialized. So they had to had to get profits, and there was a golden era of Chinese journalism in the late 90s to early 2000s, where there were a lot of good investigative reporters. They did a lot of good reporting. Oftentimes, they weren't able to do it in their own area. So like if you were a newspaper reporter in Guangzhou, for example, a big city near Hong Kong, you could go to but you had to report to the party officials in Guangzhou. But you could go to a different province or different city and do some really good stuff on government malfeasance or corruption, and report on that. And so for a while, there was this hope that China was going to develop great journalism, and a lot of good journalism was done and good commentary. But as time went on, there became more and more limits on that, and they stopped that process of a journalist going from their hometown newspaper to another to do the reporting. And it's all become very, very, most of the great journalists from a decade ago are now doing something else. And so, yeah, I mean, at the same time in social media, right around the same period, well, 2008 to roughly 2013, they had Weibo, which is the equivalent of Twitter or X, just a micro blogging platform that became really, really popular. They said they had over 500 million users. And there was a time where there was a lot of public commentary that was very sharp, very anti-government, I guess you could say, or very critical. A lot of legal voices, people promoting the rule of law or constitutionalism. And then in 2013, they really had a crackdown on these people, on the so-called big Vs. They were called Vs because they were verified. So the people, kind of like verified on Twitter, where there's the blue check mark.
Blue check mark, yeah.
Which now, of course, is there's contested meanings about that. But so at one point, China said, they did a study and they said these big Vs, their total reach is bigger than the state media, like the CCTV and Xinhua and so on. And they said this is a problem, and they really cracked down on it. And Weibo is a much, much less lively place. But it's still, I mean, there's still some interesting discussions. There's a great Twitter handle you can go to called What's on Weibo and see some of the things people are talking about. So, I mean, there still are discussions and debates for sure. There's also a degree of space for very nationalist sentiment. So it's kind of like state control of the media, except for the far right, essentially. So, what's the guy's name in the U.S. that was sued?
Trump.
No, not the guy who's denying the Sandy Hook murders.
Anyway. Alex Jones.
Yeah, so it's kind of like there's a lot of Alex Jones types on the Chinese internet, and not a lot of like independent reporters or investigative journalists left. So it's kind of this perverse thing where the worst of the worst are given space, and yeah, so that's definitely not positive.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. So like how is China, trying to position itself as a bit of a peacemaker in the Middle East, without losing their sense of irony? I mean, like are other people, other world leaders in the world stage, taking them seriously? I mean, I definitely don't think America is necessarily saying, "Oh, let's see what China has to say about the Middle East, conflict." But about some of these Middle East countries, whether it's Palestine, Iran, Saudi Arabia, whoever. I mean, because going back to the Uyghur situation, it's almost like they have like zero sense of self-awareness. So how is this peacemaker role kind of being received?
It's a good question. I mean, I think it's being received with a lot of kind of criticism or eye rolling by a lot of people. But in the Middle East itself, I mean, I think even the U.S. administration, I believe Blinken, Secretary of State, said we don't necessarily object to China playing a role in facilitating peace. I think he said something of that sort. So, I mean, the key thing is China is a huge economic partner for almost every country in the world. I mean, it's the biggest trading partner for most countries in the world. And it's certainly increased its economic ties with Saudi Arabia, the UAE, with Iran, with Iraq, Israel even. I mean, they have actually very close economic ties with Israel. So when China says whatever it says, other countries are going to pay attention to, and they're going to show it deference. And I mean, to be fair to China, I think they have a degree of cognitive dissonance where I think if you genuinely talk to Chinese diplomats, they see themselves as playing a positive role in bringing about peace in the Middle East, and they probably see themselves working positively. And like I said, they did facilitate discussions between Iran and Saudi Arabia, decreasing tensions. I mean, maybe that's a net positive, but at the same time, what's also very important to say is that in June of this year, since the Uyghur crisis really began, I mean, it really, really got worse in 2017. They detained large swaths of the population. There's debates about how many people, but estimates range anywhere from a few 100,000 to up to 2 million people of roughly 13 to 15 million ethnic minorities in the region. So that's a large group of people. Many of them were placed in re-education camps. They're called vocation education camps, but essentially just camps where they were brainwashed and had to learn Chinese patriotic songs, learn Mandarin, read the criminal law. And there's all sorts of terrible, terrible news of torture and rape and other things that took place in these places. Forced labor definitely happened. And at the same time, hundreds of thousands of people, most likely, were then put in prison. And it's a little bit misleading because when you say someone has gone to prison, you think of a trial, you think of a sentencing. I did an op-ed looking at UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, where they issued some opinions. There's a guy named Ekbar Assat, entrepreneur who went to the US and took part in a State Department program. When he got back to China, he was sentenced to years and years in prison. There's a Uyghur doctor, Gulshan Abbas, also sent to prison. China could not tell the UN whether there was even a trial for these people. So you have hundreds of thousands of people potentially put into prison with no evidence that they ever did anything wrong, first of all, but that there was even a trial. And this has especially affected the elite, the Uyghur elite. So poets, academics, doctors, businessmen, entrepreneurs, many of this class. Some people call it a genocide. Some people have also coined the word eliticide, for they're taking out the elite of people who are kind of the can bring the Uyghur culture to the next generation through culture and poetry and art and history, and taking out these people, and most likely, maybe potentially putting them in prison for life. So you have this incredible situation, and the Arab and advocates for Uyghurs are just so frustrated because they say, why don't we get any support from the Muslim majority countries or Arab states? And just this June, members from the Arab League went to China, including Mahmoud Abbas, the leader of the Palestine Authority, and they basically agreed with China's handling of the situation. So it's
Wow.
real. It's really just kind of shocking. The Arab League visited earlier this year, and the state media was saying they reject Western accusations of ethnic genocide and religious persecution. China has destroyed many, many mosques or shut them down and not allowed prayer. But when these people go to visits, they'll go to a mosque and the mosque is 100% full, and they are essentially seeing a dog and pony show that the government puts on, and they're just willing to buy it, partly because I think they want to buy it, and it's really not it's not in their interest to really push back. So
That's unbelievable. Yeah, I mean, obviously, it it's the case, but it feels so wild that, I mean, maybe it doesn't feel wild. I mean, you know, countries are always going to try to preserve the status quo, preserve, save face, look okay. I mean, I certainly don't want to become naive in my own thinking about my own government and its
Mm,
ability to deceive or its ability to hide things, or even, it's missing the mark on our ideals basically our entire existence as a country, right? And of course there's no perfect people, but it's missed the mark pretty widely in certainly in some areas, right? What is China's in game? I mean, you say world, they want to be on the world stage, but how does this support of Palestine and like not this non-support of Israel, how does that actually accomplish what they want? How does that put them? How do you imagine they think that puts them in a position where this is going to be successful for them, as this peacekeeping giant? I mean, are they even any good at that? Have they done that before besides this year? I mean, how, I'm just,
yeah.
what's going on with that?
Well, I mean, China has sent many people on UN peacekeeping missions. So, I think all things being equal, China would prefer to see peace in the Middle East. I mean, it's in their interests. It's in their interest to business wise, security wise. I mean, so I do think that they're genuine in that is in their interests. Um, but I think that I mean, some people from the Chinese diplomatic point of view, they may say we're genuine at the UN. The U.S. was the one who vetoed a resolution at the Security Council for a ceasefire, and China is on the position of we're for a ceasefire. And just yesterday or 2 days ago, they vetoed a U.S. resolution that would have called for a pause. And you know, it, they, their wording on that was, let's see if I can find it. Um, it was very interesting. It said, if you don't mind if I read, I know that's terribly boring, but they
Right.
say, oh yeah, so yeah, it's basically they say our position is based on facts, based on law, based on conscience, based on justice, and based on strong appeals in the entire world, in particular Arab states. Um, and they go on to defend their position, saying, um, China is by no means indifferent to the harm against civilians. On the contrary, we strongly condemn at the first opportunity all violence and attacks against civilians and call for the release of hostages. But what they're against is indiscriminate, asymmetrical use of force. Um, so it goes on. But I think, to be cynical, I think they think nothing we say or do can make a difference. Let's position ourselves as neutral and like the nice sounding words that we can to win public opinion. And I think that they sense, probably quite rightly, that if Israel goes into Gaza to try to take out Hamas, they could very well end up in just a bloody quagmire that is going to really inflame public opinion around the world, especially among Muslim states and Arab states. Um, and China kind of can read that, the writing on the wall, and is trying to get ahead of that. And they see, on the other hand, one way to interpret Chinese actions, it's kind of like negative partisanship in the US, where it's like, it doesn't matter what the Republicans are doing or the Democrats. We hate the other side so much that that's become our North Star, in many cases, right? Where they saw that Biden came out very forcefully for Israel. We stand with Israel. And I think China, to some extent, is in this posture of like being anti-American and or taking the opposite view and everything. So that, I mean, that's one way to look at it. Um, And like I said, another way to look at it is they potentially see the US thinking that this isn't really about Israel and Palestine, and it's really more about Iran and a proxy war with Hezbollah, Hamas, Yemen, all these pieces of the puzzle, and that this is going to wear down US opinion, approval in the world, and make things safer for the Chinese vision of world order, if that makes sense.
It does. Yeah. I'm curious how you feel China, is positioning themselves with all these other conflicts, not just the conflict in the Middle East, but, they've, like to your point earlier, they seem to have found a frenemy, if you will, like with Russia, and with their, assault on Ukraine, which I don't see a lot of proclamations from the Chinese government saying, "Hey, Russia, you should probably stop that." But so I'm wondering if maybe you can kind of talk a little bit about that, and then also, Mike, how does their alliance with Iran and Palestine or Hamas specifically like fit into maybe their broader long range goal of starting a war with Taiwan or reacquiring the land of Taiwan?
Yeah. Well, it is curious that China has always emphasized for years and years and years that every country has its right to its sovereignty, and that if you criticize it for human rights, you're interfering on their right to sovereignty, and this is in the UN Charter. And so this has always been kind of what we thought of their North Star, right? And then it comes to Ukraine, where Russia just invades another country with no reason or rationale, and in just the most egregious way. And you're like, what? Whatever happened to all this, sovereignty talk? And so it's really kind of depressing to see their positioning on that. And they had considered Ukraine, I forget the exact wording of it, but it's like a strategic partnership before that, just a few years before. But the key thing there that people may not remember, China hosted the Olympics right before the invasion in February. And really the only world leader to come was Putin, one of the only world leaders, and most of the top Western leaders boycotted. So that was a humiliating thing for Xi. And at that time, they signed this long document on forging a new relationship without limits. And there's a lot of questions. Did Putin tell Xi that he was going to invade? And China claims that they didn't, but it'd be kind of negligent if you didn't ask. The question that everybody was wondering for months, is Putin going to invade Ukraine? And Xi didn't even think it was interesting enough to ask that question. I find that hard to believe. So, there's a question of, did China have knowledge? Certainly the Biden administration provided them with intelligence saying that Putin was going to invade, and China dismissed it. So anyway, that's a big debate. But I think what you see from China's point of view, a key thing to understand is that they have been subjected to sanctions, various government officials. Obviously, Trump had his trade war. And then Biden continued that with a chip. We can no longer export high-level chips to China. And in the world of AI, of battery technology, and all of these like high-end computer processing things as like the drivers of the modern economy, China has really seen this as a huge threat to their development. And it's created them, to be very, very anti-US kind of across the board. Although, relations are getting better, and Xi and Biden are scheduled to meet up in San Francisco, most likely in a few weeks. You could make the argument that China, like I said, they claim the whole South China Sea, going all the way down through all the Southeast Asian countries. And the Philippines has recently had, a contested issue there. So has Vietnam to some extent. And then we also have Taiwan elections coming up, where China, you know, that will add uncertainty, and certainly in Taiwan, I think in general, that's an uncertain situation. So I think from their point of view, they think when the U.S. is depleted of its resources in Ukraine, maybe in the Middle East, when the U.S. is less popular, or when the U.S. can be seen as hypocritical because of its position in the current conflict, that all benefits China, quite frankly. So
And
I
that's
mean,
kind
that's
of what,
part of the calculus.
yeah, they're just hoping that they can somehow position themselves that they can be seen as a non, as almost like you said, like neutral, nonviolent, respectful of country sovereignty and all these things, and how they can somehow make America look bad that will help them, which is interesting because it feels like they're so tied to us economically. For them to want our downfall seems like a little bit like almost like cannibalizing, your not your competition, but yeah, like basically like when two companies come into the same company puts two things in the same area and they're cannibalizing their competition. I mean, I can't, the market there, and stealing from themselves. It kind of feels like it's almost maybe a little bit like that situation. And you could speak to that, but
Yeah.
you mentioned in our email correspondence, you mentioned initiatives like GSI, GDI, GCI, BRI. What are those? And how do these initiatives align or conflict with China's stated aim of promoting international order with the UN at its core? What's going on
Yeah.
there with those initiatives?
Yeah, I mean it's something to know about for sure. I mean, the Belt and Road Initiative is now 10 years old, and this was basically China's. Well, in one way, it's seen as this massive infrastructure project where they are investing massive resources to build roads, to build dams, to build airports and stadiums and railways and subways all around the world. So one way to think of it is that it's this big thing. They've injected, some people estimate, trillions of dollars into this. Realistically, though, I like to think of it more as these are all things that China is doing in its foreign policy anyway. And the Belt and Road Initiative is just the marketing slogan that they use to describe it. I mean, for China, it has a good connotation. Like it was originally the Silk Road. They changed that then to Belt and Road. But the Silk Road was an overland route from China to the Middle East, Africa, and Europe. So for Chinese people, it conjures up when China was great, when China was kind of the heart of commerce and trade, and it was internationalization in some ways on Chinese terms. So by building greater relations with all these countries and investing more, they are able to, forge better ties and gain more leverage. And at the UN, then they can use that leverage. So, when there's a resolution, for example, to condemn what China's doing on the Uyghurs, there was a recent resolution, and I believe it got 52 countries' support. You can make the case that that's not very many relative to the gravity of the situation. So why is China able to win the influence of countries? Well, I mean, if you're a leader from Kenya or the Democratic Republic of Congo, and China is investing billions of dollars, some people might say there's even a little bit of corruption involved. Is it really worth your while to insult a country that is talking to you in your own language about development interests and building the infrastructure things that you need? And are you going to take a position that China cares very, very deeply about and offend them when you have no constituency domestically who cares at all about the Uyghurs, to be honest, in let's say the Democratic Republic of Congo. I mean, there's not. It's just it's not a big issue in the swing state of Ohio, and it's not it's not a big issue there either. So you know what I mean? It just all comes down to that. And I hope I'm not being too harsh to my Uyghur friends who may be listening, but.
No, I'm curious. The fact that you brought up Congo, I think, is kind of an interesting thing to discuss because, I mean, Congo holds like what 70% of the world's cobalt supply, which is going to be necessary if we want to have this huge EV revolution. But Russia is also there, and I'm curious to get your thoughts if you think China's buddying up with Russia has any connection or anything to do with what's happening in Africa.
Well, it's interesting because I mean I mentioned that partially when I was at Amnesty International. We did reports looking at the human rights abuses in the cobalt field. So I mean, you can Google, whether in YouTube or Google, Amnesty International, "This is what we die for," which was our main report, first report, where basically we covered artisanal miners. So basically people who are digging for cobalt, oftentimes with their hands or with just like rudimentary tools like a shovel, and then taking those rocks, at the end of the day, then going to a market. And that market was often run by Chinese individuals who then would sell that in the supply chain to smelters who were often Chinese. And then from there, it would go into the global supply chain to all sorts of different companies. So not just Chinese companies or EV companies, but Apple and Microsoft and BMW and Mercedes and Tesla at the time. So it was a very complicated supply chain. And Chinese, to be honest, the Chinese government reacted to that report relatively well. They took some efforts, I believe, to improve the situation marginally. So in other words, for many human rights reports on China, they'll just dismiss it outright. This they took a little bit better. So it's a complicated situation for sure. But I think what China recognized is that EVs would be the future. They saw that many governments in Europe were putting caps. They were saying like by 2030 or 2035, we're going to go to full EV. And so they were looking at this and they said, oh, well, we got to get the battery minerals. We have to have car manufacturers in China who can produce those EVs. We have to have if you were in Shanghai, I think it cost something like 70,000 RMB, so like $10,000 to get a license plate, kind of as the licensing. But if you had EVs, it was free.
Whoa.
So they gave all these incentives. They had massive incentives for customers to buy EVs, which then supported the industry. And so they became massive players in the mining, the smelting, the battery manufacturing, the EV car making, and the sales. So they thought of the whole thing, and right now, apparently, like German car manufacturers went to the Shanghai Auto Show just a few months ago, and they were apparently just absolutely shocked. They were like, holy beep, China has really, really made gains, and now they've become a major player in the EV industry worldwide. I personally, I have to say, I don't think China did anything wrong there. I think the government was very, they were very forward thinking. So I can't really blame them for that. Right. I don't know if we got off topic there, but yeah, I mean, they are looking for these minerals and things all around the world. But so are other multinational companies. The difference is no one in the U.S. was really thinking about this on a very strategic level until perhaps just recently.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just for the interest of time, this will be our last question, but I'm curious on like as a China watcher, kind of twofold question. One, like, how do you watch what China's doing being here in America? So currently you're in an undisclosed location. Um, and but you do pay attention to a lot of what's going on in China. So I'm kind of curious on, means and methods, just curious, if you care to share. And then two, of the things you're watching, what sort of implications, will those things have, you think, in kind of the broader context of what's happening in the Middle East and China's involvement?
Yeah. That's a good question. I mean, I think it's become harder and harder for like people to follow China accurately. Um, Unfortunately, in the end years of the Trump administration, China kicked out many of the reporters from like the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, um, and quite a few other major outlets. So they had some great reporters too for those outlets, who were very experienced, could speak Chinese fluently. And now a lot of those people are gone. There's fewer people on the ground. But at the same time, we're in an information overload period where there's so much information on China, it's kind of hard to process it all. But for people listening, some resources that I would highly recommend. Um, there's the Bill Bishop is a guy who runs Cynicism, which is a website, a Substack that you should subscribe to, and he just has a wealth of China information that you can follow every day in his newsletter. You can go to Sinica, is a good podcast by Kaiser Kuo, who is a great, brilliant China watcher who's also very sympathetic to China and its development plight. But he was also a rock star in China, so that makes him unique in that he was in a heavy metal band in Beijing in the 90s and 2000s. So those are two really good ones. There's China File is another good website. But yeah, in terms of so those would be some great resources that people can go to. And of course, you can go to me on Twitter or X, William Nee, and I can maybe reach out with other recommendations. Another one, just the China Global South Project is another really good one. And they cover China really from the point of view of the Global South. Africa was the China Africa Project, but they've expanded. And they have a lot of really good coverage on China's interactions with the Middle East. They have a Substack you can subscribe to, but you can also go to their Twitter account or X account and follow them.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah, I hope those resources are useful, but I would just say that what China is doing is very, very important. I wish we would pay a little bit more attention to them and a little bit more, detailed way in the U.S. But unfortunately, we always seem to be so focused on our own kind of crises of the day. So
yes, absolutely, and it definitely is hard to take yourself out of your own little microcosm, your own corner of the world where it's all of your life, and start to think about other people. And it's not easy to think about other people and their plight. It's just it's not easy in human nature because we just focused on the people closest to us. And once you get a certain amount of people outside, right, it's like, that's why you have to show all these like stories and these horrifying images or these gut-wrenching images or these images or videos that appeal to the heart and appeal to someone's emotions, because otherwise, why would anyone in America think about someone in China unless there was a compelling reason to do so? And vice versa, right? I don't expect a Chinese citizen to be thinking about me in America unless there's some kind of compelling reason to do so. And so I hope that this can kind of bridge some of those gaps, the information gap, the ignorance gap that many of us have when it comes to China, We just know that, man, almost everything I look at, like it has made in China on it somewhere in my house. So that's like a lot of times, honestly, the extent to which people even think about China. But we just appreciate it so much, William, for coming on here. Go ahead.
Let me just give a caveat that, China's like the US, it's a very, very complex country. And, I'm a China
Absolutely.
watcher, but you're America watchers, and every one of us has different views on what's going on in the US. So I just say that these are my opinions, but yeah, I'm great.
Yeah.
I'm really, really glad to be on the show, and I love what you guys are doing and always bringing
Oh, we
very
love it. And we
voices together.
Yeah.
It's exactly what we need, instead of just increasing our hatred towards the other side, So
Absolutely. And we're so happy that we get to do this and be a part of this. And I could tell that you're a China watcher, but you're a China lover. You love the people of China, and that's how all of us should take it, right? It's Chinese government. The Chinese government is made of people, and people are very
exactly, and
imperfect,
I
and they
feel that is a very important point. I mean, I'm in this really because I do really love China. I had a great experience living there, and I feel bad for the political direction it's taken, but that's kind of where my motivation is from. And I feel a little bit bad sometimes when we see all this really, really hawkish rhetoric or dehumanizing rhetoric, and that I just don't think is good. So yeah, thanks a lot for that, Josh.
absolutely, absolutely. And yeah, we love China as well, and the Chinese
Yeah,
people. And at least I can speak for myself. I can't speak for Will.
yeah.
I don't know about Will. He can be kind of a xenophobe
I can go either way.
sometimes. Just kidding. He's like one of the most accepting people I've ever met in my life.
Yeah,
So, but
sure.
thank you so much, William, for coming on. And we want to encourage everyone, all of our listeners, check out the resources that William talks about. Listen to the podcast. Go check out the other one we did with William. Get an understanding of what's happened with the Uyghurs. Because I'll be honest, I didn't even hear the name until we had our first podcast, and that just shows you the extent to which the ignorance is there. Because I try to keep fairly, although I'm not a news junkie, I try to keep up somewhat. So it's but it's just so great to have you and to be able to do that. And everyone who's joining us, thank you so much. And until we see you again, keep your conversations not left, not right, but up. All right, guys. God bless. Have a great time.
All right. Take care.